All right, let's bless and then we'll get right to work here for about an hour. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu v'tivanu so b'yimei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, sovereign over time and space, who makes us holy with commandments, commands us to engage in the study of Torah. So, Chevre, we return to the Jewish way, living the holidays, and today we encounter Yom Atz'ma'ut. Let's make sure you can see all that. Hopefully this is not in the way. So one of the ways we think about Israel's Independence Day, Yom Atz'ma'ut, is as a matter of resurrection and redemption. What might the resurrection be?
For the reestablishment of Israel.
Right. So there are kind of two major things, right, that lend to the actualization of Yom Atz'ma'ut, right? One is the end of exile. And of course, one is the Shoah. And the redemption part comes from this notion that we've been able to create a sovereign state, and our people have risen from the ashes of the Shoah and found redemption in a modern sovereign nation. Sound about right so far?
Yes.
So far.
Okay, so let's keep moving forward. So Yom Atz'ma'ut reflects this notion that there's a new Exodus. All right, so let's go back to the old Exodus, which we just observed through Pesach.
Mm-hmm.
What did that Exodus look like?
Well, we spent 40 years in the desert.
Okay, and before that?
We were slaves in Egypt.
Right, so we're slaves in Egypt for 400 years, and God finally hears the cries. Something creates that witness, and God, through Moses, puts into motion a liberation. And so our people are liberated from slavery in Egypt. They go from a narrow place into the desert where they're going to receive Torah. And as a result of receiving Torah, they're going to live a life of responsibility. Through the use of their freedom, they're going to make the world around them matter through the practice of mitzvot. And as such, the theology indicates that people will be rewarded for this act of responsibility, or these acts of responsibility, these acts of commitment and commandment through fulfilling mitzvot. So that covenant, as we reflected during Yom HaShoah, was essentially shattered by the Holocaust. This notion that God would redeem us over and over through our practice of mitzvot just didn't seem to ring true for so many. Or if it did ring true for so many, the original covenant seemed broken and needed to be reestablished and renewed. And some feel actually that that shattered covenant became even a stronger covenant, a more lovable covenant. God became even more lovable. The idea of doing mitzvot became more powerful even. So if you subscribe to this notion that our people rise from the ashes of the Shoah, prepared for a new redemption, they resurrect from the ashes, prepared for a new redemption, that freedom story becomes Yom Atz'ma'ut. And therefore, that's why we think of it as a new Exodus story. Any questions?
I'm curious, was it by choice or by partial accident the fact that we start with Yom HaShoah, then there's Yom HaAtzma'ut, followed by, oh, whoops, followed by Yom HaZikaron, then Yom HaAtzma'ut.
So I think that Yom HaShoah sets up this reality that calls for a new redemption, a new exodus. From the ashes, think of that terrible metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
From the ashes, we are resurrected. Not only are we resurrected from the terrors of the Shoah,
Mm-hmm.
those who survived, those who would live beyond, those who would come after, we've all had this opportunity to live out this new exodus. For those who perished, obviously, we have to carry on their legacy to ensure they didn't die in vain, to make sure that the blood they spilled will not have been wasted, that somehow we will rise above it all. Right? So Yom HaShoah sets up that framework, also puts forth that notion of a shattered covenant from which we will also rise. And the other thing, of course, is that it puts us on path with world understanding that the Jews need a sovereign nation to take care of themselves. We need a sovereign nation so that we may defend and protect ourselves, so that we may remain resilient despite the hatred in the world, despite the anti-Semitism in the world. So it makes sense, doesn't it, that we go from Yom HaShoah to Yom HaAtzma'ut. And Yom HaAtzma'ut and Yom HaZikaron, they go together. Because in creating independence and in defending our Jewish nation, soldiers have died.
Mm-hmm.
Children, grandchildren, family members, friends, they have died in pursuit of this independence, which was not just achieved in 1948 and to this day. Is something that Israel has to fight very dearly for.
Mm-hmm.
And so, sadly, there were new soldiers added to the Kaddish list. Each and every time we observe this important day of independence.
Although I had to.
So let's ask you a basic question. This may seem like a trick question, right? So we kind of look at ancient and modern beginnings of Zionism.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ask you who the first Zionist was.
Moses?
It's a good choice. When in doubt, just guess Moses. I might have
could have been Abraham.
Could have been. Let's take a look. Ruben, do you want to weigh in?
Well, it's funny. I was gonna say Abraham. The problem is that I'm not sure by at least the definitions I've heard, he'd be a Zionist. I think Moses or Joshua actually probably would be even a better answer.
All right. Look, I think that you could argue Moses. You could argue Joshua for sure. You could even say God, in a sense, is the first Zionist. But according to Rabbi Greenberg, Abraham is. If we turn back to chapter 12, verse 1 and following in Genesis, Lech Lecha, what is it that God wants Abram and Sarai to do?
He wants them to go to Israel, but
yeah,
does that make him necessarily a Zionist?
Well, it's an interesting question. The notion here is what? that Abram is to Lech Lecha me'artzecha, right? From his land, from his birthplace, right? From his father's house.
Mhm.
Mibeit avicha el haaretz asher arecha. He's supposed to go from all those places where he has a deep sense of identity, but a changing and shifting identity. And he's going to go based on God's request, command, really, to go to the Aretz. And what is the Aretz?
Israel.
Yeah. And what will happen there? I will
It'll
make
you a
go
great
ahead.
nation.
Yeah, I'll make you a great nation. And as such, I will bless you. So
Although it's
it may be convenient for us to label Abram as the first Zionist, but here
mhm.
is the first moment in our Torah, right? We're only 12 chapters in. It's the first moment in our Torah
Mhm.
where it would seem that one of our ancestors, Abram, Sarai, their family, are focused on going to the land, going to Haaretz,
Here's an interesting
and
question.
setting up a home there, setting up a nation there.
Mhm.
What is Zionism? It's many things, but one of the things it is about creating a place, a home, a state where Jews can create a nation and
Mhm.
govern themselves and defend themselves and to sustain Jewish ideas and culture and faith traditions.
Okay, here's an
So,
interesting
go ahead.
question though.
Yes.
Why isn't Israel named after Abraham, but named after his grandson's given name
Right.
when he was an adult?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I think that Israel as a name for the collective
Mhm.
renders much more moral power, more theological power. In other words, we are the people who wrestle with God like our ancestor Israel wrestled with God and prevailed. The fact that we possess that name as a collective gives us real responsibility to engage in that wrestling match and to draw more morality and ethical direction from it. So, in my opinion,
Mhm.
But it was also called Judah. Israel was also called Judah.
that is as well. That's true. And so Jews are named after Judah, but in this case, it's less so our ancestor Judah and more the place of Judah.
Because I was going to say,
Right?
isn't
People come from
Judah,
Judah are Jews, and then that
according,
became the name for us. We
isn't what
were
we're
we were
hearing?
look we were Hebrews in the beginning,
Mhm.
and we were not Jews in the beginning. We were not Zionists per se in the beginning, but we had a longing. We had this existential, spiritual, historic longing to leave wherever we are outside of the land and go to the land. This is a very, very native, ancient, long-standing, historic energy, desire, will, dream, hope. All right, let's move ahead. All right, so let's see what Rabbi Greenberg has to say about this long-standing yearning. Linda, please, to exemplify.
To exemplify the Bible's message, the Jews should be a people rooted in their land, a place overflowing with the bounty of nature, and pursuing a life of justice and loving kindness at peace with neighbors, a living witness to the infinite possibilities of finite existence.
Okay, so what's the essence here? That we as a Jewish people, from the outset, from our biblical origins, seek to be rooted in the land. And in being rooted to the land, we will be able to pursue a life of tzedek, of justice, and of gimilut chasadim, of acts of loving kindness. And we will pursue shalom, we will pursue peace. These are the basic responsibilities for which we must bear witness, for which we must act out. These are the possibilities of our finite existence. We're not going to be here forever, so we need to make life matter now by seeking peace, by living justly, by being kind, and by having a place to which we can become rooted and protected and sheltered and challenged to be a force for good. All right. Where did our most extended exile begin?
When we went into Egypt.
Okay, that's fine. I'll buy that. I mean, there are a number of exiles, right?
Mm-hmm.
400 years in Egypt. The period of the first exile, right? When the Babylonians destroyed the temple, and 100 or 200 years later, the Persians reestablish us in the land, right? So it wasn't that long. It was shorter than the 400 years of slavery in Egypt, if memory serves.
Mm-hmm.
But then the longest exile begins when?
After the destruction of the Second Temple?
That is correct. So in the first century, specifically 70 of the Common Era, our people are essentially on the way to a very long exile. Ended in what year?
1948.
1948, upon the establishment and independence of modern Israel. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
That is a very long exile. Almost 2,000 years.
So when was the time of Masada then? Wasn't that in between somewhere?
Well, I don't remember, to tell you the truth. We can ask Rabbi Google. Can actually ask Rabbi Google how long the Babylonian exile was too.
Mm-hmm.
I meant to look it up and I forgot. But the exile was in motion. Right? Once the temple was destroyed, we were effectively in exile. It doesn't mean people weren't in Israel. It just means that effectively we were cast out spiritually, in some cases physically, emotionally, morally.
It was 70 years for the Babylonian exile.
Okay, so not 200, not even 100, 70 years. And of course, we have tremendous prophetic literature in exile over that period. yearning to help us find a way to get back to the land. So going forward, we get to the first century and the destruction of the temple. And what do we know about Masada?
Masada was in 73, 80.
Okay, so it's essentially in the same period, and things were going downhill for us.
Mm-hmm.
Exile was in effect and lasted till 1948. Very, very long time. Now, one of the interesting realities about exile for us as a people is that while there were existential dangers for us, not living in our own sovereign space, not being able to live completely and freely as Jews without fear of anti-Semitism, without being denied dignity, or with, let me rephrase that. Having dignity compromised, having our lives threatened, ultimately having 6 million lives wiped out. Somehow or another, as a people, we never imbibed the degradation that came of the horrors of exile. We paid the price in terms of fear, in terms of our dignity being challenged. Paid the price not having our own sovereign space. Ultimately, we sacrificed 6 million people because of hatred in the world. And there's nothing that can soothe that. But through it all, there were still people who believed. There were still people among us who felt proud of their Judaism. There's still people among us who yearned for a new freedom, a new liberation, a new exodus. And so when it came in 1948, it was a very powerful experience. Who's the father of modern political Zionism?
Would that be Theodor Herzl? Or
Theodor Herzl.
I paid attention in class.
Yes. Oh, there's Theodor Herzl right there.
Mm-hmm.
If you will it,
To Ainzo Agada. If you will it, it is no legend. Theodor Herzl was one of the most important thinkers of his time, the end of the 19th century. And he believed that if we believed, if we dreamed, if we willed a modern state that would protect us and give us sovereignty and be a place where we could establish safe boundaries in which to thrive as Jews, it could happen. So let's go backward a little bit. Let's see, maybe go back. Okay, so what gave him ultimately the concept that we could in fact create a modern state of Israel? What gave him the chutzpah? Rabbi Greenberg reflects here. Reuben, please, in the 19th century.
In the 19th century, modern culture and emancipation had fundamentally changed the Jewish people. Maimonides message was power, human power. It was time for humanity to take charge of its destiny and create a brave new world.
All right, so the chutzpah comes from a lot of emancipation, right? Since the American Revolution and the French Revolution, the Civil War, emancipating slaves, emancipation is in the air. And given our narrative emancipation, our narrative of freedom and liberty, it was time to create a new message. And one thing that came of this was this notion that people had power to create such freedom. It wasn't about waiting around for God. It was about taking responsibility as human beings to fulfill our destiny to be free people.
So I'm curious, people have asked why, when it was offered, Herzl and others didn't take the islands that were given as a choice of where Israel could be. And
It was also Uganda was also given as a place for.
mhm,
Yeah. So look, I mean, I think that we go back to Genesis 12, that is, and we understand that the land is the land that God showed us then. God didn't show us Uganda or some islands or Siberia or Canada, in the Yukon or whatever. God showed us Canaan. God showed us what is today Israel. And so people were motivated. So besides having power and besides emancipation being in the air, you had persuasive people like Herzl who were able to create a vision. Im tirtzu ein zo agada. Fired by the vision of a Jewish homeland, Rabbi Greenberg offers, thousands left hearth and home and chose a life of personal sacrifice, life of hard work and bitter struggle to restore the neglected and ruined land. Okay. So we've already laid it out pretty much. What is the major crisis? We've been living in exile for nearly 2,000 years. So difficult reality, painful reality, but not nearly as cataclysmic as the crisis of our people in the 20th century, the Shoah. All right, it's understanding the power of this crisis and the energy that we derive from it to transform the modern state into a reality. Let's see. Linda, your turn. Or Ruben, did you read yet?
yes.
Okay, Linda, your turn again.
The extent and extremity of the attack became clearer with every survivor's tale. The Shoah was a gigantic triumph of death, of cruelty, of despair. The Holocaust threw down the gauge to every hope and affirmation in Judaism. It made a mockery of Jewish millennial faithfulness.
Okay, so firstly, what does millennial faithfulness mean?
Well, for more than 1,000 years, we've wanted Israel.
Right. Right, and the millennial faithfulness has to do with believing that if we live a life of mitzvot, if we live a life believing God, we live a life longing for Israel, longing for the Messiah to come, that will be restored in the land of Israel. And was it that simple?
No.
No,
Not even near.
especially since
Not
we
even
were
near.
offered.
Hi,
other
Devorah,
places.
welcome. So,
Sorry.
no problem. Nice to see you. The Shoah totally laughed at that faithfulness. And it was one big tale of terror. Devorah, jump right in.
Read.
Yeah.
This time, crisis and transformation. This time, belief in the Exodus could not be simply affirmed. This time, in Europe, no Moses had been saved from the drowning. To go on living, the Jewish people had to decide to live. Evil and death had played their highest cards. The Jewish people had to raise their bid on life. To bring home the survivors and to end dependence on a world that did not care, the Jews would have to win a state.
So it's not enough just to live out mitzvot. It's not enough just to believe in God or to love God. That covenant is shattered. We learned this when we talked about Yom HaShoah. The covenant is shattered. The exodus of the covenant that created a situation where God heard our cries and liberated us from slavery, gave us a chance to live a life of purpose with freedom and with responsibility to live out Torah, and promised us redemption, ongoing redemption because of that commitment. That covenant is broken. And in order to create a new covenant, not only did we need a new attitude about Torah, we needed a nation that would cover us in times of danger, that would sustain us in times of challenge, would shelter us in times of uncertainty, and not place that responsibility in anybody else's hands but our own. So for the transformation to be complete in relationship to this terrible crisis of the Shoah, for us truly to rise as phoenix from the ashes of the Shoah, we would have to win a state. We would have to gain national independence. All right. So, the new Exodus. Devorah, we've been talking about the Yom Atz'ma'ut being a new Exodus. Different than the old Exodus.
Got it.
The new Exodus. So, one of the things we've talked about so far is the significance of establishing a sovereign nation. One that not only can govern itself according to Jewish ideas and values, but can protect itself and its citizens, and frankly, any Jews, for that matter, from anti-Semitism, from violence, from hatred, from terror. And so we know that the establishment of this new Exodus is not just a political activity, it's also a faith activity. How so? Are all Zionists political Zionists?
No.
No. So there are other kinds of Zionists, right? A religious Zionist. What's a religious Zionist hope for?
Messiah.
Among other things. Okay. Maybe ingathering the exiles from the diaspora, from Galut, bringing them to Israel as a way of inviting the Messiah forward. That's certainly a religious idea.
They're also secular Zionists.
Well, they're secular Zionists and cultural Zionists, and the truth is that these various Zionisms are key to Israel's success. Right? It's not just a political entity; It's a cultural entity. It's a religious entity. It's for sure a secular entity.
Also identity.
Yeah.
Self-identity.
Yeah. Its identity draws from all these types of Zionisms. So look, if Israel is to be based on an ancient commitment to justice and Gimilut Chasadim, these are not just moral principles, they're religious principles, they're faith-based principles. They are part of the covenant. Israel is the Jewish state, so it is partly political and partly religious. And religious is part of a cultural reality as well as a social reality. It's all these things. So, in other words, for the new Exodus to really take form, we know that sovereignty is key, defense is key, and the Judaism is key. And of course, we understand that Judaism can be reflected authentically in many different ways, culturally, socially, morally, ritually. All these things play out in Israel.
But not all are recognized.
Well, more or less, right? It's part of the challenge of a diverse community that's not always sure how to be inclusive. All right. By the way, how do you like this new look here? I've learned actually how to make a PowerPoint presentation on Zoom. Hopefully you can see it nice and easy now and big.
But you
Yes.
need to make it a little bit narrower so the pictures can go along the side.
I've got it. I've got them along the side.
Yeah, so you can move the picture, you can move the people, you can move yourselves. I have you underneath all the writing so it doesn't block. And by the way, since I'm recording, people will see they won't
Your
see
view.
blocked. All right, so let's see, Ruben, the deeper truth.
The deeper truth was that Israel's faith in the God of history demands that an unprecedented event of destruction be matched by the unprecedented act of redemption. World Jewry bent its energies to see to it that this has now happened.
All right, so never had a Shoah before. Never lost 6 million people before. Never had to deal with the profound, unspeakable pain before. The sense that we're literally consumed by the fires of hatred, left to be ashes. Never had that kind of powerful moment. Been some very bad, destructive, alienating, isolating, lethal moments in our history, but none on par with the Shoah, none paralleling its horrors. So given the extent and unprecedented nature of that tragedy, in order to create some kind of faith balance, we needed to have another unprecedented event, one in the form of establishment of a state, a nation that would help us resurrect from the ashes of the Shoah and to bring to an end nearly 2,000 years of exile. Before you came on, Devorah, we relearned that the exile between the destruction of the first temple and the restoration of our people to the land by the Persians was not a very long time, not even 100 years.
70 in my class, I showed
Exactly.
a timeline that said
Now, of
70.
course, we have a whole section of the Tanakh informed by exile, pre-exile, post-exile, exile, pre-exile, exile, post-exile. right? The prophetic literature is all about that. But it wasn't a very long period of time. I had forgotten how long it was, and when Linda looked it up and said 70, I was like, wow, that seems like so short. Now, of course, that was a small percentage of the total exile we had as slaves. All right, I'm not totally sure how long that was, but let's just sort of take...
they say 400 years.
So let's just take that at face value. It's not that long either. I mean, easy for me to say, right? In the freedom.
Yeah, you're not in the 200th year of it.
And the ease with which I live a lot of my life. I'm not boasting. I'm not trying to trivialize. But 400 is not 2,000. Okay. So 2,000, long time. So we need something really huge to break the chains. So Rabbi Soloveitchik provides us an interesting reflection on the nature of the Shoah and the importance of moving forward towards a new Exodus. Linda, I think it's your turn.
In the heart of a night of terror, full of horrors of Majdanek, Treblinka, and Buchenwald, in the night of gas chambers and crematoria, a night of absolute hiddenness of God, in the night of the reign of the Satan of doubts and apostasy, a night of ceaseless search, when the people of Israel lay inundated with sorrow and faint, tossing and turning in its bed amidst death agonies and the torments of hell, came a knock at the door of Jewish history.
Yeah, impressive, eh? So, firstly, this notion that God is hidden is something that we encounter also in Yom HaShoah. God is not hidden ultimately in the Passover story.
He was.
Well,
when they first came into Devarim, God forgot about them.
Right, and was effectively absent and hidden. But the big difference is that our people didn't have, they were not Esther, right? God was hidden in Purim as well, or at least far away enough that Esther and Mordecai had to step up, lean in, put their leadership to work. What do we do when God is hidden? We step up, we lean in, we put our leadership to work.
Act in place.
Yeah. So this knock on the door is a great metaphor in terms of understanding the nature of this new Exodus. So, according to Greenberg, there are 6 key reversals: historic, social, political, that lend to this new Exodus, and then 1 renewal. Okay, and I'm actually pulling up a section here. So bear with me a second. So one of those reversals was a political one. Can you make any guesses as to what key political historical fact came to be in this period of time, pre-48? What key geopolitical reality had to come into view for the Israel for the modern state to rise?
Wasn't it like the fall of the Ottoman Empire?
No. I mean, I think that's part of the narrative, right? I don't think it is totally irrelevant. But there's something in particular that, by the way, these interesting reversals are near miracles from Soloveitchik's perspective. What's one thing that happened after World War II between Russia and the United States?
The Iron Curtain.
Yeah, well, the Cold War. All right. Cold War meant basically the US and Russia agreed on nothing except one thing.
Israel.
Israel. The importance for a Jewish state. And so they were able to cooperate enough to help make it happen. Now, what about a military reversal? What were the odds that the Israeli army could defeat its enemies in those early days?
Very low, very high, low?
Very low. Very low. They had old planes, insufficient arms, no tanks, and they won. Unbelievable, right?
Mm-hmm.
But a key reversal.
The American Revolution.
Should have been knocked out, but they weren't. All right. Theologically speaking, what was the key reversal? What was Abraham promised?
His offspring would be a great nation.
Yeah, he was promised land and a nation. And this is not a political thing. This is a religious thing. This is a promise made by God. Promise that went unfulfilled for 2,000 years. Now, all of a sudden, our landless, wandering Jews are not wandering anymore. They're back to the land that God showed them, showed their ancestor, our ancestor.
So is it payback for the Holocaust?
Well, look, I can't answer that question. What could possibly pay anybody back for even one murder?
But that's why many people resent the idea of the fact that the state of Israel came to being largely a result of that Holocaust, and that it feels wrong.
Yeah, I understand. I understand. I feel like I feel like it's a convenient perspective for one who doesn't understand the true devastation that not just families endured, but the entire Jewish people endured. I do think that it doesn't mean we can't or shouldn't listen to those who have other pain and suffering because maybe they were sent out of the land that they felt was home. There are Palestinians that were forcibly removed from their homes so a Jewish state rise and thrive. There are supremely challenging, difficult, and painful losses endured on every side of this matter. I think what's important is not that we criticize people for being opportunistic about experiences that give them a chance to rise again and heal and be renewed while others suffer. I think it's important for people to sit down and share their tales of brokenness and to inspire empathy and compassion and some commitment to coexistence that will allow for some kind of healing to go forward. Incidentally, whether that lends to the establishment of, two states or something else, I'm not quite as concerned about that as I am concerned about the capacity for people to really empathize with one another and to somehow understand or feel or connect or sympathize with each other's pain. So, what about a cultural reversal? And this is sort of a matter of opinion.
I have no idea.
So, Devorah, remember we were talking about how some Jews felt the Shoah was in fact a punishment for assimilation.
Yes.
Some felt it was a punishment for Zionism, right? We're not supposed to be assimilated. And, Zionism is a human construction. We'll get back to Israel when God tells us to. It's not
when God takes us back.
Or when God takes us back. But this isn't it. Let's say for a moment, you want to embrace the notion that assimilation is a challenge. What is Israel's response to that assimilation?
Who's a Jew?
Okay, well, it's not a simple response, but by and large, what's supposed to happen for Jews in Israel? Theoretically, ideally, what's the promise? You're going to go to Israel and you're going to be able to do what?
Have your own piece of land and
Yeah.
make it great.
Yeah, everything's going to be Jewish there. Whether you're secular or religious, doesn't matter. Everything's Jewish. So there's no assimilation. By the way, just in case you're wondering, I think that I don't think things are just automatic because you set foot on Haaretz. I think you have to be serious about committing to Jewish ideas, Jewish values. And I think sometimes you can be secular to the point where you forget some of the Jewishness that can gird your Judaism. And I think sometimes when we're too religious, we can ignore that there are many ways to be authentically Jewish. I guess the good news is that these kinds of debates do exist in Israel. The bad news is that the Jewish people sometimes can be very exclusive depending on how they look at Zionism or assimilation or who's a Jew. And that can be very challenging. But by and large, this notion that for those who worried that assimilation would completely wipe out the Jewish people, this turned things around. The next key, this is the fifth key, value of life. One of Hitler's goals was to make Jews inconsequential. He was annoyed by this idea that somehow we were created in God's image and actually applied ourselves collectively towards some kind of moral wholeness, to bring a moral imperative to the world. He found this inconvenient to his own sense of morality. So what does he do? He denies the humanity of the Jewish people. So much so he's willing to wipe them out.
That was his desire. He wanted to have a museum to a no longer existent people.
Exactly. So what that means is that it's a way of trivializing the Jewish people, making their blood less valuable.
It's interesting, Rabbi, that it seems to me that in his desire to wipe them out, he wanted to have a museum toward them, about them, which kind of negates the point that they're meaningless, if you get my drift.
Yeah, I get it. Look, you know, I can't find the words to support that Hitler would have seen Jews as meaningful. What I think he thought was meaningful was his perspective about who's a real human being and whose blood is truly valuable and whose isn't.
Well, actually, in a backwards way, he kind of got his wish because about 2-3 years ago, I read an article that his birth home has now been turned into a Shoah memorial museum.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I've never been there yet.
Hello.
So the thing is that with the establishment of the state of Israel, an independent, sovereign nation defended by soldiers who are devoted to the ongoing independence and liberty of Jewish people in Israel and throughout the world, now how do we value the blood of a Jew, of a Jewish soldier? Very highly. The state of Israel doesn't come into being without the miracle of these smallish bands of equipped soldiers putting their lives on the line, sacrificing their lives for the freedom and independence of the Jewish state. And so we reverse that. Reverse the cheapness and make it very valuable. Make the blood very valuable. Lastly, the notion of citizenship. So because we are entitled to return to the land of Israel, to be citizens there, did that exist before? We have citizenship as Americans or as French or as Germans or as British, right?
Mm-hmm.
But those are not Jewish citizenship. It's not Jewish citizenship. It's some other kind of citizenship. Here in Israel, we have a citizenship in the law of return and the law of citizenship. However flawed it may be in a broader conversation, this is a tremendous reversal. The last piece is not a reversal, actually, it's a renewal. What is one thing very noticeable about land in Israel versus land, say, in Syria? What's
Land
the
in
color,
Israel
what's the
is
color
ours.
of land? What's the color of land?
Israel has got a lot of green in it.
Yeah. Israel has a lot of green. Syria doesn't have as much green. Other places around Israel don't have as much green. Israel is much like the land around it in that it's a desert. But the land cultivated by Jews has unusual green to it because they've been able to make the desert bloom. From Soloveitchik's perspective, the land seems to like the Jews. I think it has to do a lot with their hard work in cultivating the land and being really ingenious about how to grow things in the dry climate.
How to find water.
And the infertile, right, in the infertile sand. But you can understand, look, there are farmers on all sides of the borders who are doing great things to make the desert bloom. So let's not ignore that broader impact. And certainly there are partnerships. We know that. Some of us were traveling together and have heard of these partnerships between Israel and some of its neighbors, particularly in Jordan, where they're trying to figure out how to grow things together. So I don't know if the land is nicer to Jews than it is to others. My guess is, it's not any more for one than another. But I do think that there's real power in us being in the land and cultivating the land and making the land bloom. And
But Rabbi,
yeah,
you have to look at the pictures that we're seeing from space of Earth right now that are very interesting.
How so?
There's not a lot of commercial stuff going on. Cars aren't being driven. The land is renewing itself.
Got it. Yeah. Well, when we treat the land right, it can work really well for us. And when we abuse the land, we can really destroy it. All right, let's try and make some progress. I want to try and finish by 12:15. It's already, I like the notion of doing this for an hour. Can't seem to get everything done in an hour. So if you're not in a rush, we can take some more time. How are we doing on time? You good? Anybody? You good?
I am.
All right, so let's see if we can take this to the end. All right, so we're going to kind of take a much quicker look through Greenberg's chapter here to kind of get a sense of key concepts or rubrics through which to understand the power of Yom Atz'ma'ut. So one of the Jewish values pushed forward by the establishment of the State of Israel, and of course we're debating just what it means to be in exile and how important it is to be ingathered from exile to Israel. But from a very traditional perspective, from a biblical perspective, from a theological perspective, even from a modern perspective, there's some value to being ingathered from outside of Israel to inside of Israel. Even if you don't pitch a tent there or call yourself a citizen yet, being in Israel is transformative, even redemptive.
Absolutely.
So, Devorah, read. So this ingathering.
So this ingathering of the exiles is it not immaculately conceived?
No, is no immaculately conceived heavenly.
Heavenly redemption, untouched by dirty human hands. Yet it remains a stunning statement of the faithfulness of the divine promise. From the east, I will bring back your children. From the west, I will gather you. I will instruct the north, give back, and tell Yemen, the south, do not withhold. Bring my sons from afar, my daughters from the ends of the earth.
Okay.
Isaiah.
So the context of this text is that the process of reestablishing the state of Israel in ingathering the exiles was never clean. It was never clean. What kinds of things do we know made it unclean?
We threw people out.
Yeah. In
We
order to
displaced
establish the
people.
homeland, we unseated, unrooted people who had lived there. People died. Create tense relations with those who don't in fact live in the land, as though somehow they are not living up to the promise, not allowing themselves to be ingathered. So there are problems internally and externally with this notion of ingathering. What is interesting to Greenberg is that it remains such a powerful call regardless. So the process of establishing the state was not perfect. There were innocent people who got hurt. There were peaceful realities that were badly, if not permanently, damaged.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting because having taught my students about the people wandering for 40 years before actually getting into the land. But God tells them they have to take it, they have to fight for it, and they have to kill people.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, that's part of the process too. It's part of what the text says, and hands get dirty. Hands get dirty, and people get hurt. And we get hurt times 6 million. We get hurt defending a state of Israel. Others get hurt in our process of establishing a state and protecting that state.
Well, actually, probably should remember that we also got hurt during the Inquisition.
Yeah, well, look, the reality is that nation building is hurtful, not only for all the romantic reasons of defending a fledgling state, establishing independence. These are reasons to go to war. These are reasons to spill blood, fighting for what you believe in. But that doesn't mean other people don't see it differently, and they themselves may value life and the land in a different way.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
I find myself comparing it to when the Europeans came to this country and took it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is the history goes to the victors, right?
Well, it was actually called Manifest Destiny.
Yeah. I think that, you have that sense in our Torah, right? From the outset. We talked about Abraham being the first Zionist, Abraham and Sarah. Because God said, go to a land that I will show you and make you a great nation there. And it's the first yearning that we know of in our Torah for Israel. So in addition to this conversation about ingathering the exiles, which is a key framework by which we think of one's passions, one's desire to go to Israel, there's also this push factor, right? That Galut Judaism is over. Why would you possibly want to be in exile when you could go to the new state? Now, we are doing Shalom Hartman curriculum and challenge this assumption every day in Shalom Hartman. That somehow living in diaspora is not a vibrant, not an affirming experience. It totally is both. And by the way, on a relative basis, when we live with the kind of safety with which we live, of course, certainly not perfect, and we have numerous counterexamples in recent years about how unsafe it can be to live Jewishly here in this country. But by and large, the idea of being in Israel is that should be safe. Is Israel completely safe?
No.
No, it's with existential dangers. It's thought the Messiah was supposed to work that out, right? Well, maybe the Messiah hasn't come just yet. Maybe Israel is not reflective of that messianic redemption just yet. Maybe it's a nation trying to get along, trying to figure things out. And it is indeed a powerful center for Jewish experience. That doesn't mean we're not. Just because Israel's Israel doesn't mean that we're not a legitimate center for Jewish life. So I would hope that we could learn to appreciate not only Israel as a center for Jewish life, but North America and Argentina and France and Britain and Germany and Canada, Mexico, other places, that are also centers for Jewish life.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
The Talmud that we use more often was created in exile.
Totally. So we can understand the powerful messianic call of Israel. Bringing Soloveitchik into view reflects on all these real historical situations that take place that are just so amazing. It must be that the Messiah has come. Incidentally, people like Elie Wiesel, who are not prone to theological hyperbole, felt that the victory in 1967, for him, it was as if the Messiah had come. Talking about reversals, talking about being in position to fail and somehow transcending it all. We surely did then.
I was in high school in 1967, and it felt like the Messiah was here.
Yeah.
It actually did.
Yeah. The thing is does modern day Israel really reflect that the Messiah has come?
No.
Well, I mean, I suppose you could say yes, you could say no. I suppose it depends on how you believe the Messiah operates. But if the Messiah is supposed to come and transform everybody into justice-seeking, peace-loving, kind individuals,
It
and
hasn't happened.
enemies are to kind of transform their eneminess into friendship, I think that there's a profoundly abundant way to go, profoundly long way to go, abundant number of things that have to take place before Israel is, truly redeemed. And by the way, we're no different. This becomes the basis for us to be able to have a conversation that reflects that, you know what, Israel's awesome, it's evolving. So is North American Judaism and Australian Judaism.
I'm not so sure about Australian Judaism.
Let's chill out. Let's take care of one another. Let's make sure Judaism is powerful throughout the world. Anyway, so we have a few more slides, and then we'll conclude. So what does Rabbi Greenberg have to say about the end of the Galut and Jewish life in the Galut? Whose turn is it?
Okay.
Reuben?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Covenant, dreams of perfection, and commitments to life could not remain dreams. Either they took a flesh and blood form in a human community with the power to defend themselves, or they would be crushed.
All right. So here, hold on. Here, we've got to do something about our vulnerability in the world, or our dreams will just be dreams and our bodies will literally be crushed. Continue, please.
Thus, the Holocaust brought to an end the period of Galut Judaism. The Jewish ethic of powerlessness had given dignity and ethical direction for almost 2,000 years in diaspora. Emancipation had begun to erode that tradition.
So, by the way, one of the reasons why we were able to live amidst such hatred and degradation is that we had the capacity through this ethic of powerlessness and the power of virtue generated by Torah allowed us the internal compass where we never totally felt down on ourselves. And that's how we made it through 2,000 years of exile. That was severely compromised in the Shoah.
Although I'm curious, this 6 million counted, does that also count for those who actually did fight to try and stay alive? And
yeah, so yeah, but the thing is that regardless of any efforts to fight back, couldn't prevent the death of 6 million Jews.
No.
Right? And it meant that whatever power we may have been able to muster, thank goodness, thank God, but it wasn't enough, and we need a nation now to consolidate Jewish power and to use it when necessary. Mm-hmm. Continue.
There had to be Jewish power now. The only way to accomplish that was by creating a nation for Jews. The state of Israel was designed to place power in the hands of Jews to shape their own destiny and to affect or even control the lives of others. Creating the state meant that Jews took on major responsibility, saving their own lives.
And I would add, in the spirit of Shalom Hartman, that Jews also have a responsibility of how they're going to use that power, right? Not just to shape destiny, not just to affect or control lives, not just to save lives, but to make sure that it's used in the most moral of ways. Absolutely essential. All right, next slide. So just a few more here and we'll finish. Yom Atz'ma'ut, the new reenactment. The official resolution said only this. This is for the Yom Atz'ma'ut experience. On this day, let all labor cease. Let the people gather in families and settlements for rejoicing and gladness, for memorial and thanksgiving, for unity and inspiration. For on this day, Israel will celebrate its new holiday of independence. Linda.
In the first year's Yom Ha'atzmut, a cornerstone was laid in Jerusalem as a memorial to those who fell in the defense of the city. The ceremony in the presence of bereaved parents and families was one of a number of memorials that were to emerge as a constant feature of the holiday. Festive lighting in the streets, folk dancing, and youth group marches marked the occasion in Tel Aviv.
All right, so the very first Yom Atz'ma'ut has all the elements. It's a happy occasion, full of dancing, marching, having a great experience, being happy. It's also a sad experience because Jewish blood has become incredibly valuable. I mean, it always was, of course. But now there are Jewish soldiers consolidating Jewish power. We pray using that power morally to preserve, to sustain, to initiate, to protect Israeli sovereignty.
So, Rabbi?
Yeah.
Is this why they created Yom HaZikaron the day before?
Yeah. Well, because there was always this mourning piece. And so I did make a slide about Yom HaZikaron here with a picture of Natan Alterman, who really captures the essential role of the soldier in Israel. So let's see. Devorah, why don't you read?
By the third Yom HaAtzmaut, commemorating the fallen soldiers had become so widespread a practice that it was emotionally dominating the day. It was decided, therefore, to set aside the day before Independence Day as a permanent Yom HaZikaron, Remembrance Day, for the dead of Israel's wars. In Nathan Alterman's immortal poem, the fallen soldiers speak, "We are the silver tray on which the Jewish state was served." A public ceremony of lighting a remembrance flame on Mount Zion was matched by the lighting of soul candles, a Yizkor candle, in all the military encampments in Israel, while flags flew at half-mast.
Okay, so there's your answer. You can imagine how hard it would be to mingle the festivity and the joy and the dancing and the singing with the somber, sober, painful, raw experience of mourning.
They also had problems yesterday in Israel with social distancing because they weren't supposed to do this.
Right. Yeah, I get it. Let's move this so you can see a better shot of Natan Alterman. And then we'll go to the last slide here. I think that's it. Yep, it's the last slide. Okay, so in this slide, Rabbi Greenberg, as he's wrapping up the chapter, gives us some insight into what he sees as the real power of Yom Atz'ma'ut. Linda, why don't you read us to the end?
Yom Ha'atzma'ut could be the day when Jews who have come from lands of oppression, where circumcision was not allowed or available, would be circumcised and welcomed into the fellowship of Israel. Yom Ha'atzma'ut could also be the time for mass conversions. By timing the ceremony to coincide with Yom Ha'atzma'ut, converts would be stating the recognition of their responsibility for Jewish destiny. Yom Ha'atzma'ut would thus become the occasion for a twin declaration of the reciprocal dedication of world Jewry and Israel, and the common recognition that Israel does not live by bread alone.
Okay. So, Israel is truly a redemptive place. So if you've been oppressed such that you could not participate in certain covenantal rituals like Brit Milah, you would come and you would be at home in Israel. And if you were living in a land where you had to lay low because of anti-Semitism, and you had to live your life in another faith tradition as a way of sustaining your existence, you would come to Israel and they would help you feel right at home. Here I find it interesting, and this has shifted a little bit, people sort of live with Jewish identity, but kind of under the radar. How much conversion should they have to go through, right? Can they acknowledge their sense of Judaism, identify as Jews, and be good enough as such? This is a challenge in Israel.
Well, it's a challenge in many places. I had a friend whose family survived the Shoah, and he wasn't circumcised, and then he had health problems. So when it came time, he did not want to undergo the process, and some Jews said, then you're not really Jewish.
Yeah, that's painful to hear that. I think what's interesting about this teaching from Rabbi Greenberg is the notion that we possess, whether we're converts or we're born into Judaism, we possess a responsibility for the direction of our Jewish destiny. It's a shared responsibility in Israel, outside of Israel, between Israel and world Jewry, right? We have this holiday, Yom Atz'ma'ut, which calls us all to declare our mutual responsibility for the power of the Jewish people, the power of the Jewish state, and the power of worldwide Jewish commitment, whether you're in Israel or you live outside of Israel, to sustaining the Jewish community. Through Torah, through sovereignty, through moral use of power, through creating sacred community throughout the world, inside and outside of Israel, through being a collective force for good, living justly and with compassion and acts of loving kindness, by giving tzedakah. All this comes out in Yom Atz'ma'ut and makes Yom Atz'ma'ut a really precious day in which we think about what a new Exodus story looks like, what healing is brought because of the rise of Israel to this shattered covenant. Yom Atz'ma'ut is a very powerful day in my mind, in my heart. So thanks for spending time with me today. I hope you enjoyed this new format. It worked so much better. I can't believe I was doing it the other way, but we'll just make everything look nice. I am finding, in all honesty, a 20-minute frame hard to live up to, but I'm not sure a 90-minute frame is going to draw more people. So this is the kind of thing that maybe I need to do more than one session on, right?
Mm-hmm. Rabbi?
Yes.
Did you use PowerPoint instead of Word?
Well, I use slides, Google Slides.
Ah, Okay, because I have to do a Sunday class next.
What I've done in the past is I create the PowerPoint and then I download it as a PDF and I scroll.
That's what I did.
Yeah, I had no idea how amazing it would look if I did it this way, but Cassandra helped me by showing me that you create your PowerPoint and then you press present, shared screen, comes out big and bold and clear.
So it is PowerPoint, right?
Well, slides, Google Slides. I think you can do the same with PowerPoint.
Okay.
Anyway, do you have any questions before we close? Anything about the material? Any other conversation you want to bring to bear here?
When is our next class?
Well, our next class is in relationship to Lag BaOmer, which is coming up.
Is it May 12th?
Lag BaOmer is May 12th. I think so.
That's what it said on the email.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about Lag BaOmer, lifting the sadness, and that should be a really interesting time. So I'm trying to think if I'm going to do a 90-minute session, I will get more participants if they can count on it being an hour each time. And so I think we'll do part 1, part 2.
Good, because on Tuesdays I have a 12 o'clock. On Wednesdays I don't.
Yeah, so I'm trying to.
Yeah, on Tuesday I have an 11.
Okay, all right. Well, I know people, if they have an hour, it's easier. They may not have an hour and a half. Anyway, good to stay with me today. Appreciate that. Hope you found this meaningful. I think that this is the gold standard text for holidays.
I just had a quick question. You know, it's bad enough that we went through the Holocaust, and then I remember reading an article about 25 years ago about a couple who wanted to get married, but they were denied because it turns out that they were mamzerim, because one's grandfather and the other's grandmother had been married and neither were dead and hadn't gotten a divorce or a get before.
Because they each thought the other one was dead.
Yeah, I know, but my point is, isn't it bad enough that we went through the Holocaust that to all of a sudden be denied because neither knew that the other was alive?
Yeah. Well, listen. What was the final outcome of all that?
They had to get married outside the country because the rabbis would not allow.
That I think there needs to be some kind of.
They had to go to Cyprus.
Understand what these people went through, and that it wasn't their fault. They weren't trying to violate marriage laws.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was just a lot of bad luck and a bad situation. I find the strictness around these kinds of rules to be problematic.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, who's chatting? Lehitraot. Thank you, Deborah. Blessings, everybody. We'll see you in some other form in the near future. Have a happy Yom Atzma'ut.
You too.
Long live Israel. 72 years. Bye-bye.
Campus class in 20 minutes.
Yes, enjoy. Have some lunch. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.